already been going on for a long time, but I guess not so long in historical terms. I mean, we haven't really been facing these issues seriously for that many years, less than 50, I would say.
Well, thank you both. Once again, it really has been a privilege to talk to you, and I think we have begun a discussion that's going on for a long time. Herman Daly in Maryland, thank you so very much for being with us.
Thank you, Warren.
John B. Cobb Jr. here in the studio, thank you as well.
Thank you for doing this for us.
And thanks to you in the audience for joining us for this plenary discussion about the economic assumptions needed to help build a more ecological civilization. I suspect, as I indicated, that we've given you plenty to think about and talk about, and now it's your turn. I'm Warren Alney.
Well, I think you agree by now with me that the study of economics can be vital and interesting again, and important. And these two figures that we've been watching for the last half hour have inspired a wide range of commentary and reflection across the world, actually. And we have some of the younger scholars here who have been inspired by this work to add their commentary in the brief time we have left to what we've been talking about. And Mark Anielski, the author of The Economics of Happiness, Building Genuine Wealth, and Just Ecological Integrity, The Ethics of Maintaining Planetary Life. Mark, how do you respond to this presentation, and how do you think we ought to carry on in a number of different dimensions in our research and work?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for having me. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and thank you. You know, and I pay tribute to, we all need mentors in our lives, and Herman Daly and John Cobb have been my mentors since 1999, when I had the pleasure of working on the U.S. Genuine Progress Indicator as a Canadian. And it was the best project I think I've ever undertaken, because ecological economists have actually contributed significantly to new thinking, new measures of progress like the Genuine Progress Indicator, the ecological footprint, and on and on. So for a small number of us, we've had a very, I think, significant influence on some decision makers, particularly in China, where I've worked as an advisor. Now, few people understand, as John Cobb has pointed out, that China has some interesting economic policies. Their main economic policy in 1989, articulated by Deng Peng, was called Shaokang. Shaokang is a Confucian word which means well-being. So China's aspirations since 1989 has been to create an economy of well-being, or moderately well-off Chinese. The thing that inspired me most was when I called John back in 1999, I said, why did you and Herman decide only in the second edition for the Common Good to talk about money? And he talked about it in the afterword. And John told me, you know, I pushed Herman to put the money chapter in the first edition, but Herman admitted, I don't know anything about money. And that is true of most economists. And believe me, and business students. I taught for 10 years corporate social responsibility at the School of Business at the University of Alberta, and I said, you're about to graduate with an MBA, and do you know where money comes from? Now, at the heart of our crisis, I believe, is the crisis of debt. Now, most people don't understand that all debt, all money is debt. 97% of our money supply is debt. The U.S. total debt right now sits at $60 trillion, and about 38 cents of every dollar you'll spend today is interest payments on that collective debt. The amount of interest paid on the national debt now exceeds the U.S. military budgetary spending, and they said that was the end of Rome when that happened. So what Herman inspired me to do when I went to his office in 1999 in Maryland was to address the most fundamental question, the relationship between money and GDP, or debt and GDP. And when I showed a graph to David Corton, who's here with us, that there's a perfect correlation, almost 0.98 R-squared, between the debt and GDP since 1950, David flipped out and said, we need to write about this. Now, The problem with the debt system is the debts cannot be repaid, so the economy has to keep growing just to finance the interest payments on the debt. Now, this is an international situation. Now, I would argue that we can go back to ancient Judaism, where they had, in Deuteronomy you read that Moses received commandments from God that debts were to be forgiven every 7 years, that there should be no charging of interest on money, on debt. Of course, we have in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. He didn't say trespasses. I'm a Catholic, so I'm like, where did trespasses come from? Now, I don't even know what that means, but I do understand debts. And Ellen and I are in this common theme. So the question we ask is, now I can quote people like Aristotle, who said the trade of the petty user is hated with most reason. It makes a profit from currency itself. Thomas Aquinas says to take interest for money lent is unjust in itself. And Plato said there must be no lending at interest. So in the past, we have these ancient understandings. Now, the tribute to Herman and John is raising the name Frederick Soddy, the great chemist who brought us nuclear understanding of nuclear physics. In 1923, he wrote about the problem with money and debt. And I could go on and on. So I believe, as Thomas Jefferson said, without virtue, happiness cannot be. One of the things I'm reflecting on in our session on ecological economics is, without a foundation, what did Jefferson mean? Without virtue. Well, the 4 virtues of Western civilization that Plato defined were moderation, courage, wisdom, and justice. And I ask every audience who can name one of those 4, I rarely get a response. So I think we have a crisis of virtue, or a lack of virtue. And I work a lot with Indigenous people. They have taught me a lot about what real economics should be about stewardship, about thanking first the Creator for the abundance that we receive. And they become our model of an ecological civilization. They are the model. They are the remnant. They are the monasteries. You know, when the fan gets hit by you know what, we're going to be calling on them to teach us again. I'd like to reflect a little bit on this idea. I know this is going to sound funny from an economist, but the idea of love. I believe, and it's not a trite thing, because love is an action. Like, love is not just an emotion. Now I want to quote a man that everyone knew or listened to. In 2003, addressing the Czech ambassador, Pope John Paul said these words: "Authentic development can never be attained solely through economic means. In fact, what has become known as the idolatry of the market, a consequence of the so-called civilization of consumption, tends to reduce persons to things and subordinates being to having. This seriously detracts from the dignity of the human person and makes promotion of human solidarity difficult at best. Instead, recognition of the spiritual nature of the human person and a renewed appreciation of the moral character of social and economic development must be acknowledged as prerequisites for the transformation of our society into a true civilization of love." So the question is, what do we do on Monday? First of all, I'd argue we need a debt jubilee internationally. This debt crisis cannot be resolved. We're going to end in war if we don't detract from this. Now, in September, I had the pleasure of being in the House of Lords in London, and we were going to get on a plane to see Pope Francis and say, "Francis, do the right thing. Declare usury as a misdemeanor," as John Maynard Keynes said, and end the global debt crisis. And what would we put in its place? We would put in its place a well-being-based accounting system. Nations do not operate with balance sheets. That's an anathema to Warren Buffett, who would hate that if he didn't see Coca-Cola's balance sheet. But that's the truth. We have no natural capital asset assessment. So money should be connected to real things, real assets. And that's my reflection this morning.
All right, thank you. Ellen, Alan Brown is the founder of the Public Banking Institute and the author of two very important books in this general area of reflection, Web of Debt, The Shocking Truth About Our Money System and How We Can Break Free, and The Public Banking Solution, From Austerity to Prosperity. So, Ellen, do you want to add to what Marcus said, or what would you advise us in terms of understanding better the dynamics we're caught in and what we need to get out of to get to a more sustainable society?
Okay. Yeah, I would like to talk about the money aspect too. Actually, John Cobb asked me to talk about that in case it was left out of that video, because it actually is an important feature of Dr. Daly's platform to not just economic reform, but monetary reform. And monetary reform means changing how our money comes into the economy. Most people think that money is created by the government. You would think that, looking at dollar bills and coins and seeing the faces of presidents on them. But in fact, virtually all of our money is created by banks when they make loans. In fact, that was said by Frederick Soddy back in the 1920s. He said something to the effect of, he spent 2 years trying to figure out money and he couldn't make head or tails of it until he realized that what he was dealing with was a confidence trick. So it's actually sleight of hand. And so money reformers have been saying that for a century at least, but they haven't really gotten any traction on it until recently. Just last year, the Bank of England came out with this rather shocking paper. It was part of their quarterly report that said, contrary to popular belief, banks do not lend their deposits. Most people think that banks that they are just intermediaries. They take in the money of savers and then they lend it out and keep some interest for that. But in fact, said the Bank of England, banks create deposits in the process of making loans. So they've admitted what money reformers have been saying for a century. And in fact, said the Bank of England, 97% of the British money supply is made in this way by private banks. And it's the same system in the US, so it's virtually the same percentage. So that obviously gives banks a huge leverage over our whole economy. That explains why the banks were bailed out in 2008 over the objection of, in surveys, most people did not want to bail out the banks. I mean, a bank is a corporation. Why doesn't it go bankrupt like any other company that has a problem with their balance sheet? But the banks managed to get the Federal Reserve to cough up $16 trillion, at least, we're not sure of the figures, at 0.01% interest to backstop the banks. So that's something that none of the rest of us got. They didn't bail out the homeowners at 0.01%. And the reason that the banks have all this leverage is that they have a monopoly on the ability to create our money supply. So in the 1930s, there was something called the Chicago Plan that was devised by Irving Fisher and others, where the banks would be prevented from creating money by what was called the 100% reserve solution, where you would require banks to just hold the money of depositors and not sort of double count it, where they're lending it out at the same time that the depositor has it, which is how the money is created. And that is a plan that Dr. Daly has been advocating for quite some time. So that is one way to get, so then you would give the government the power to create the money through some sort of federal agency, a monetary authority rather, like the Federal Reserve. So that's one way to do it. But in the 1930s, we were in a depression, and the concern was that would cut off credit even more, and we needed credit. So what Roosevelt did instead was to set up a publicly owned financial institution, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which made 1% loans, or very, very low interest loans, to all sorts of development, businesses, farms, dams, roads, things to rebuild the economy and put people back to work. So that went on for 20 years, and during that time, the country was rebuilt at very low interest. World War II was funded, and the government turned a profit through all that. So we rebuilt everything, and we made money doing it. We, the people, we, the government. So that would be the approach I would advocate to, rather than trying to cut off credit by preventing banks from creating money as credit, to set up some public banks. We, the people, should own the banks, and the interest should go back to the people, and the credit should be directed for public purposes, not for speculation. So we have one, we have one such bank, the Bank of North Dakota. But globally, 40% of banks are publicly owned, and they do very well. Like in China, for example, which is probably the best example, the government controls where the credit goes, and they support their industries. They don't extract from their industries. They actually support development, support exports, et cetera. So we could do that as well. We could use quantitative easing to, instead of, right now what quantitative easing goes to is to bail out banks, basically. So the money doesn't get any farther than the bank balance sheets. But what we could do is use that same feature, the ability of the central bank to create money on its books to fund all that infrastructure that everybody agrees, both parties agree that our infrastructure is in terrible shape, but they can't agree on where to get the money. Nobody wants to raise taxes, and nobody wants to, the other option is to privatize, or et cetera. So we could use quantitative easing for that. We could bail out the students, or maybe just write off student debt.
Yeah.
We can make low interest loans for homeowners. There are many things, or we could just give a national dividend, which I think is a great idea. I mean, we were born into the 21st century when supposedly everything is mechanized, and we, the people, should get the benefit of all that mechanization. We don't have the jobs because machinery has taken it over. Robots have taken it over. So you've got to get the money into the system to put money in people's pockets so they have money to spend to keep the economy stimulated. I know there's the question of whether that wouldn't use up resources, but you don't want to starve the people just to avoid using resources. And I would argue that you could, if you direct where this credit goes, where this money goes, as the Chinese do and the Japanese, et cetera, you could direct it into better ways of doing energy, ways that don't involve oil and that are better on the economy, ways of cleaning up the air, cleaning up the oceans, doing garbage disposal in general. I mean, there are all sorts of inventions that we know are out there that just haven't gotten going because they don't have the funding. So we could put money into research and development aimed at conservation, aimed at preserving the economy or the environment rather than exploiting the environment. So that's basic. Okay.
I wanted to say thank you for Ellen for enlightening us that China adopted Abraham Lincoln's ideas. And so isn't that ironic?
Well, you could say that, but unfortunately, a Chinese person wrote to me and said, actually, we had it first. The Chinese had paper money in something like the 10th century.
We're almost at the end of our time, but I can't resist asking Mark about recent developments in Canadian politics. Should we be encouraged by what's happened here recently?
Well, in my province, we now, after 44 years, have a new government. The new Democratic Party won the election. Rachel Notley is our premier. She's actually my backdoor neighbor. It's pretty cool to have the leader being right behind your house, and I can have a policy clothesline, and half of caucus are women, which is awesome. So, yes, we have the dubious honor of the tar sands. We would sure love Prime Minister Harper to leave the stage because he's been the worst Prime Minister. But hope springs eternal. So there's work to be done, and I believe there's all kinds of possibilities. As Ellen and I know, we can. Money is just a figment of our imagination. We can create an economy that pays a living wage. If I campaign for president, I'd say, all Americans, I'm going to guarantee you a third of your working life off, because right now a third of it is spent paying for interest on unnecessary debts. Would you vote for me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Zihi, do you have an announcement? Hello?
We have a small change for the Chinese-only track. 1 second, yeah. Can I speak Chinese? 那个在中国朋友请注意一下，就本来今天原来咱们计划是在那个培泽学院那个 session 就把它取消，然后所有的那个就是都参加这个 bilingual 这些双语的这种圆桌会啊，大家分散到各个分会你们喜欢的啊，就不用去那个这么远的地方了。好，谢谢大家。
All right, thank you. So, just a couple things to say before we break up here. The video you saw this morning will be available on the pandopopulist.com website. So, it's well worth seeing, not just once, but several times, because it's a very insightful take on what's going on economically and what we should be doing. There are books available, Ellen's books and Mark's and Herman Daly's, Josh Farley's books are available in the book room, and I encourage you to go over there and browse, and perhaps even to buy some books. And then you should know that this morning in the Smith Campus Center patio area, the coffee is on us. So come over and have some coffee and have some fellowship before our tracks begin again at 11. The Pete's Coffee Shop folks are off with a wedding, and so coffee's on us. Thanks for being here, and hope the rest of the conference is as exciting and insightful as it has been.
One final thing before we go. One final thing before we go, please. John, would you come forward, please? Sit here. Everyone else, stand up, please. We're going to serenade John Cobb Jr. singing If I Have Had a Hammer.
I had a hammer, I hammer in the morning, I hammer in the evening, all over this land. I hammer out danger, I hammer out warning, I hammer out love between brothers and sisters, all over this land. If I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out danger, we're hearing it. I'd ring out warning, oh yeah, we're hearing it, John. Love between my brothers and my sisters, love. And we're hearing that love too. If I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, I'd sing out warning, I'd sing out love between my brothers and my sisters. everyone. And thank you for singing with us.
We need to wake up. We need to wise up. We need to open up our eyes and do it. No, no, no. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now. We're on a planet that has a problem. We got to solve it anymore than do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now. Make it greener, make it cleaner, make it fast and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right
Now!
no point in waiting or hesitating. We must get wise, no more lies, and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. We need to wake up, we need to wise up, we need to open up our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now.
Amen. Thank you.